Okay.
Well, mine has something.
Maybe that would work. Yeah, I played a little football in that Huddleston man.
She said she was very
That was about the time in '62.
Hey, Alma. How you doing?
Okay.
How are your boys?
Another level we had to go down and sleep.
Oh,
I live for work over there.
okay.
Hello.
That's it's cold up there.
It was like 50 degrees. Like he loved it.
Well, I say, that summer's very long up there. I mean, winter's very long up there, yes.
Might not remember this like you.
What do you mean?
You used to help fence the trees, or who used to?
Yeah, yeah.
Give it emotion.
Yeah, I don't know, he might have been red. I was
Here's the-
Okay, we got study sheets in the back for whoever wants one. Hey, Nellie.
Hello.
Hello, Philip.
Come up with him if I could see that.
How you doing, Phil?
Got a question?
All the odds are in your favor. There's only two choices. So it's a 50-50. Did you? Have you ever heard of the bearded darnel? Bearded darnel. That's right. Hello, paralysis. Or is it paralysis? Well, we'll go ahead and get started, and others will come in as they get here, as the saying goes. So as we get started, Phil, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the life that you give us. And we thank you for the opportunity to have your word, to be able to look at it, to be able to hear it explained. I pray that you will never let the thirst go from us for your word. Be with those who are on the road, coming over here. Be with those who are sick and need your help. Be with Jeff just now as he brings us this stuff. In Jesus' name, we pray.
Thank you. If you would like to turn with us to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew 13. Matthew 13 is a very big chapter when it comes to parables. It was as simple as Jesus going up one day and sitting by the lake, and the crowds came to him, and all of a sudden it became so crowded that he had to get into a boat and kind of float off the shore so that he would just have space. I mean, y'all seen me speak. Would y'all like to crowd in amongst me? You might get, that's just the way it goes. So you got to have a little bit of space, just be able to breathe. And so that's what happens. But in Matthew 13, you're loaded down with 8 parables. You got the parable of the sower, the parable of the weeds, the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the yeast, the parable of the hidden treasure, parable of the pearl, parable of the net, and the parable of the house owner. All in a single chapter. It's interesting because you have long parables and then you have short parables. A couple of these parables are only a verse long. You might remember the first class of this study, we've been doing this all summer talking about the parables, was the parables of the hidden pearl and the treasure. Short. Still took it the whole class. Still talked about it for a couple hours on Wednesday morning. And And so, I mean, so this stuff is like, it's rich stuff. That's how come, you know, I don't know about y'all, but I've loved doing this parable studies because they're also rich with things that we can learn. And people have told me in this class and in the Wednesday morning class, I've never seen that parable like that before. I didn't know that parable was talking about such and such. But isn't it odd because it's been there for almost 2,000 years? You know, who's not seeing it? You know, we're not. You know, so I mean, that's the whole thing. You know, let him who has ears, let him hear. That's the whole point about it. Matthew 13 is not the first chapter which contains parables. You want one of Jesus' first parables, you got to go all the way back to Matthew 7, the wise and foolish builder at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And but this is the first major chapter that talks about the psychology or the methodology of using parables. You know, it gets into why Jesus used parables. Matthew brings up the fact that, you know, the use of parables was one of the marks of the Messiah from the Old Testament, so it fulfills prophecy. But beyond that, it's that idea of he who has ears to hear, let him hear. There's a point behind that. You know, the teachings of Christ, just like any other good teaching. You know, if you've ever tried to teach anybody anything, you know that you can throw all the teaching out there you want to, but that doesn't mean that teaching is being absorbed by your audience, because if they don't want to hear you, they will just simply turn off your ears. Parents, you know this too. You try to tell your kids something and they just don't want to listen to you, they're not going to listen to you. So he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Teaching of Jesus was for everybody who was there, and also for us today if we choose to read it. But that doesn't mean we have to absorb it. That doesn't mean we have to gain from it. You know, it's how are we going to use it? So we spoke about all this in the introduction of the series. This chapter is about the power of the kingdom of heaven, you know, with the parable of the sower. You have 4 different types of soils, but it's the same seed. The seed was good. It's just based on what kind of soils it planted in. You also see this in the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the yeast. You also have the power of the world. This is the different soils from the parable of the sower. You also have the value of the kingdom of heaven that we talked about in the second class of this series. It wasn't the first class was an introduction. But the second class of the series, the treasure, the hidden treasure and the pearl, about the value, all about the value of the kingdom of heaven. What is its worth? Also Matthew 13 is talking about end times. We're talking about that today. And the ability to apply the teachings of both from God in the Old Testament, so to speak, Jesus Christ in the New Testament with the parable of the homeowner and bringing stuff out of the storm. You know, all of that. Jesus spoke about all of that in a single afternoon. That sounds exhausting. Yeah, but you know, that's the way he did it. So I mean, it's a very loaded chapter, and that's the preliminary for all of this. So just this parable of the weeds is just kind of in the middle of all these other parables that's talking about the kingdom of heaven in various instances and in various ways. So that's what we're doing. So after Jesus gives us the parable of the sower, and then he explains the parable of the sower to the disciples, he then launches into the parable of the weeds. It says in verse 24 of Matthew 13, Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. Okay, so kingdom of heaven, that's what we're addressing. You know, everything this parable is about is the kingdom of heaven. So kingdom of heaven is like a man. Okay. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the weeds and went away. When the weeds sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At the time I'll tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the weeds and bring it into my barn." He who has ears, let him hear. Okay. Do what?
Sounds simple enough. There's a lot of work in separation.
What are we talking about?
Well, some I gotta believe, but you know, like, and then the change, we talked about that, like Joanne was talking about, people dissect the Bible versus out to, you know, fit their.
Yeah, you can call it cherry picking, you can call it proof texting, the same thing. You know, you just kind of use what you want to use for what you want to use it for and get rid of the rest. Yeah, you know, that's.
And they're actually believe that they believe, you know, they really do think that they believe.
Yes, they do, they believe. So seed is sown into a field. Good seed is sown into a good field. Now these days, this is something that we might forget. But if you want to sow a field worth of crops, where do you get your seed from? Or where can you get your seed from?
Now?
Yeah, now. Modern day.
Feed store.
It's a feed store. They'll do it for you. You know, but imagine living in the ancient world. Where are you going to get your seed grain? And how do you make sure that all of it is seed grain and not other stuff mixed into it?
See,
You have to go through it and make sure what it is.
yeah, when you, like in this, there's two things that look similar, right, when you're younger.
Yeah.
So you want to pull it up. When it's formed a seed of wheat, a grain of wheat was different than a grain of oat or a grain of wheat or whatever. So you would know what you're picking.
One of those is wheat, one of those is weed. Can you tell the difference?
Bottom is wheat.
Yeah, the bottom is wheat, top is weed. Now,
And living in.
yeah, that is right. I tried to find, you know, better pictures, but, you know, no, that's it. I'm kidding. Now, it's easy to do that just looking at two, but imagine you got a couple 100 acre.
Well, but that's easy.
Yeah,
Where it's hardest before the seed forms.
yeah.
It's the same way, like around here, they plant sorghum.
Mhm.
My brother came down here and said, man, they plant the corn all close together. I said, no, that's milo. That's sorghum. That's milo.
Yeah.
Oh, I said, it looks just like corn.
Right. Yeah,
But
sure.
once the seed starts to come, then they.
Exactly.
See.
I couldn't find any before seeds came on.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah. But even with the seed on, they're similar, you know. But imagine before the heads get on. Okay, now that's the point. Keep that in mind. So seed is sown into a field. Now this was not like today where you can just go out to the feed store and get just a sack of seed of whatever you want. You had to go and you had to collect your own seed. With previous plantings, you had to keep back seed. And you didn't want to mix weed seed in with your good seed. Okay? So the parable is told from the basis that this was a guy who went out and planted, and we're told, he sowed good seed into his field. He did that hard work. The good seed is what he had, and so he sows that. So it takes a lot of effort to do this. Now, during the night, we're told, an enemy sows seed into the field. If any of y'all battled weeds, I hate the weeds down here. I've never seen weeds like they have down here. I mean, oh my goodness gracious. You know, I thought goat heads were bad. But the weeds that they have down here, you can take out civilizations with that stuff. I mean, it's hard. You can switch a kid with a weed down here. I mean, they're big old thick things. And can you imagine some jerk going in and throwing in a bunch of those seeds into your nice crafted flower garden or vegetable garden? Whew, man, that's just mean.
Yeah.
No wonder they call him an enemy. That's just. I know people who kill over stuff like that. So the seed could have been what's called a bearded darnel. That's what that is on top. That's a bearded darnel. And, you know, as we were talking, you know, it's also called, if you like scientific names and stuff, maybe you know it as the Lolium timolentum. And it has a wheat-like appearance in its infancy, what we're talking about. Now, when the heads come up, the game's up. But in the beginning, because, you know, look at what it says. In verse 25, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed seeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. So up until the time that the wheat and the weeds sprout heads, if you looked out onto your field, every plant looks the same. You wouldn't know. you would think everything was fine. Then heads would start to appearing, and all of a sudden 50% of your land, and it's not even separated, but intermingled 50%, is weeds. What do weeds do? They suck out the nourishment, they tackle the good plants and choke them out. They go MMA on your plants and try to choke out and make all your other plants submit and die. That's what they do. That's the purpose of weeds. That's why they were a curse from the beginning. God didn't give us weeds because he liked us. They were a curse. You know, it was a punishment for sin entering the world. And so they didn't know until it was too late.
What's MMA?
Mixed martial arts. The stuff they do on the octagon. They also do a lot of
Mickey Mouse had it too.
no, they do a lot of choke out, sleeper hold, get people to tap out and stuff like that.
Oh, you were military. Oh, I know you for that.
Now, Joanne, I know that you once upon a time had passed. I can see you throwing down in a past life. See you throwing down in the octagon and
Yeah, right.
putting some knuckles to some people.
I have to doubt that.
But it didn't follow that.
But this is why the weeds are not noticed until they appear. So again, you wake up and all of a sudden, all of these weeds are interwoven with your good crops. So the question is, what do you do about it? Now, immediately eliminate all insecticides and whatnot that they might have today that can kill all the weeds, but leave your stuff alone. They didn't have it. So if all you're left with is, you know, basically your only option is weeding it out, how do you do it? What do you do? Because we all know if you yank a weed, only the weed's going to come out, right? What can you do? What can you do? The worker suggests going out there and weeding the field. Okay, what's going to happen? You're going to cut your good stuff out. I mean, you're going to, you know, say you get all the weeds, what percentage of good wheat might you also pull out with the weeding process? I mean, it's just, and if that, again, think about it back in the day, it's not just wheat, that's also your money. I mean, you know, I learned that lesson the hard way. You don't ask the cattlemen how many cows they have. That's offensive. I didn't know that until I moved to Oklahoma. You know, and I asked a good old country boy, and again, they don't miss words. You know how Travis Lester speaks? The whole state talks like Travis Lester. All right, and I love him to death. Don't get me wrong. But but that's the state. Oklahoma, they don't beat around the bush. Very upfront, they tell you what they think. And so, you know, I asked the cowboys. I said, "Well, how many heads of cows do you have out at your ranch?" It's like, you might as well ask me how much money I have in my wallet. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, never mind. But that's the thing. That's not just wheat. That's their money.
Yeah.
So so you know, you can't just go out and just start cutting and pulling weed. That's gonna make everything go south. So better to let both grow and coexist until the time of the harvest. And when the harvest comes, then the separation will transpire. The weeds will be bundled and put into the fire, but the wheat will be gathered and put into the barn. What did you say earlier? That's all fine and dandy to say. That is work. Anybody, you know, again, this is hardcore weeding, pulling, and burning. Now, again, one of the cool things in Oklahoma is that you could burn your yard leavings in your yard as long as there wasn't a burn ban. So we had a lot of pine needles and leaves and stuff in our yard that we got to burn, but, you know, just doing, you know, that's a lot of work. That's, you know, so some of y'all done stuff like that. And also what the situation here is just pulling weeds and having to do that for the whole land, separate them, look at each stalk. Okay, what is this? What is this? One at a time. Doesn't that sound like fun? Why did kids want to leave the farm and go to the city? But I mean, but that's, you know, it is what it is. But that's the parable. So the question is, where are we supposed to get out of it? What's the point of all this?
God will take care of it.
God will take care of it. Now, this is one of those parables in which Jesus actually does explain himself. So you would think my job would be easy because I don't have to do it. Jesus does it for me. But the problem is maybe not. Some well-meaning people have come along through the past couple of thousand years and tried to add it on to Jesus' explanation. Like, why do that? There's really no reason to, but they want to try to do it for their own good. So, between the explanation of Jesus telling this parable, Jesus then tells the parables of the mustard seed and yeast. And then in verse 36 of this chapter, we're told that he left the crowd and went to the house. His disciples came to him and explained to him, and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." What do y'all think of the disciples?
It reminded me of me, because I keep don't understand a lot of things.
I said, the older I've gotten, the more I've said, thank God for them. Thank God for them. So Jesus leaves the crowd. The disciples ask him to explain the parable. Now, again, he who has ears, let him hear. Focus on that line. He who has ears, let him hear. We do not need to get down on ourselves because we do not understand some teachings from Jesus or the Bible or whatever. We know that, right? If we read something and we don't get it in the first pass, that is okay. It really is. It does not mean we're stupid. It doesn't mean we're ignorant. It is totally okay. Because outside of the disciples, there were others who got direct orders from God and did not understand God's thinking. It is okay. And again, thank God for the disciples. Now, Jesus did not pick the disciples because they were the smartest or the best students. We know that one as well. Now, again, these guys have been deified by other religious groups. There's really no reason to. The things that were special about them were not their academic prowess. Sure, Matthew was an educated guy. He was an accountant. Later, you have Luke, who was a doctor. Paul was a very educated man. Not as much known about the rest of us as much. Some of them, hardcore blue-collar type guys. The fishermen. One was a zealot. That's an Israeli terrorist against the Romans. And then, let's not forget Judas Iscariot, who ended up betraying Jesus. Don't get wowed by these guys because Jesus picked them to be disciples. Because one of the reasons why Jesus picked them is because they did not mind asking these types of questions. Have you ever read the gospel and just like, why would you ask that? Why would you say that? And that's why we can thank God for them, because they did the dumb stuff that we would have done if we lived at that time and were in that same situation. They did it for us. We get to read about it and say, oh, goodness sakes, whereas they had to experience it.
Luke wasn't one of the 12.
No, he was not one of the 12. He was just a later follower.
Yeah.
In fact, you look at 4 Gospels, only 2 were disciples. Matthew and John. Mark was an associate of Peter. Luke was an associate of Paul. But it was because they were willing to ask. They were willing to ask. They didn't get it, so they asked. When Jesus would talk, I love this, because sometimes they say, and you just say, how we say in the South, bless your heart, that's actually a knock. You know that, right? Maybe I don't know if it is down here, but if you live in what people think of as the South, if some Southern woman comes up to you and say, God bless your heart, she's actually calling you simple-minded. And so sometimes the disciples say stuff, and you're just like, oh, God bless your heart. Like when they were talking about divorce, and Jesus is talking about divorce, and he makes the statement that unless your wife runs around on you, you're not allowed to divorce her, because if you then go over and marry, you're committing adultery. And disciples, they just jaw drops off, and it's like, well, if that's the ruling on divorce, then who could get married? Like it's such a bad thing to say with your spouse. You know, and just stuff like that. You're like, oh, guys, come on, man. But it's because they asked. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. It's not just for those who are so quick-minded that they pick up on all the parables right after they come out of Jesus' mouth and they say, ah, got it. Okay, I'm with you. But it's also for those who ask. Remember what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount? Ask and you shall receive. What? We think, people like to use that to talk about stuff. But what was Jesus actually talking about? And which is more important? The knowledge of the kingdom of heaven. Ask. It will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. Look for it. Search for it. Hunt for it. You'll find it. Breaks my heart when somebody comes up to me and they say something like that. I don't understand this teaching, or I don't understand that teaching, or I'm reading this and I'm not getting it. And I have to call them and I say, just keep going. You're going to be fine because you're searching for it. And since you're searching for it, you will find it eventually. Because God is good. If he knows that you're searching for it, I'll help you find it. Those still be like the Pharisees and some of the people that Jesus had to interact with back in the day who wanted to use Jesus' knowledge for their own ends, try to set Jesus up, get him in trouble, and all that kind of stuff. Jesus didn't have any of that at all. But if somebody was earnestly seeking, oh yeah, they'll find it. Keep going. Because as we all know, it's about the pursuit. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey, they say. But how much truth is in that? So don't, as teachers, we all have variations of this saying, but what's the only stupid question? The one you don't ask.
I don't agree with
Okay.
that. As a school teacher, there were stupid questions.
Now, wait a minute.
And they
Now.
asked them on purpose
Okay.
to
Okay.
disrupt.
Okay. That's okay. There it is. There it is. Okay, maybe we should rephrase it because you're right. So now, what's the only sincere stupid question? The one that's not asked. Now, the one that's there to waste time, yeah, that's. Oh, I love how C.S. Lewis put it.
Because there was a lot of those on the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
That was asked Jesus.
Right. C.S. Lewis had a great line. Oh, for goodness sake. It's something along the lines of, if I'll find it, I'll put it on Facebook. Well, I got it somewhere. But it's, sometimes people ask very stupid questions about God, and they say, well, why can't you answer them? Very easy. Stupid questions are always very hard to answer. It just really shuts that down, can God create a rock that's so big that God himself cannot move it? It's like, come on, really? Everything that we can know about God, that's what we're going to go with, that we're going to focus on today. All right, I got better things to do. We only got today. We got 24 hours in a day. Let's do something a little bit more special. But to ask those sincere questions like the disciples did, that's what disciples were, they're students. That's what we've been called to be disciples, to be students. The students ask questions. And teachers like Jesus, they made the environment healthy that you can ask questions. Maybe you remember this from high school or college. There were some professors that did not like being asked questions. I had a teacher in psychological stats. Oh, I hated that class. One of the reasons I chose psychology, I thought there was no math. There's an entire class, stats. It's not even that was bad, I just didn't want to do it, But someone had the audacity to ask our professor a question. Didn't y'all read the chapter last night you were supposed to read? I thought you were paid to tell us something we might not have gotten. I didn't even ask the question. That was the reason. And then this guy, he's my college mentor. He's the one that's supposed to help me pick my classes and formulate my graduation plan and all this other jazz. How often do you think I went to this guy? If you said 0, you're right. That was just because there was no environment to make mistakes. There's no environment to ask questions without getting your head bit off. That's not a teacher. It's not. But I think some of these college professors are way overpaid and have way too much power because they don't teach. They're going to teach you anything. They're going to teach you how to cross the street. Jesus set up an environment to be able to teach and nurture the God. Like a farmer preparing a field to be able to receive good seed. See if your picture wondering how it's going to tie back. There you go. So they asked Jesus to break down the parable, and Jesus breaks it down very nicely. Okay, so we get this. Verse 37. He said, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man, the field is the world, and the good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom, the weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. Very nice of them. Yeah, you got to break that there on your sheet. Now, the problem is that some people try to add to this and try to say, we are told the field is the world. Jesus said that. No. The field is the church. And this parable is about, good and evil being in the church. And in order to deal with the good, we also need to be willing to deal with the bad inside the church. That's not what Jesus said. Okay? That's not what this parable is about. And again, people get into trouble, and they write books, and they teach others. And they really go off the deep end on some of this stuff, when in this case, we're very specifically told what everything is and the point of this parable. So, don't be tempted to fall for this stuff. Now, something else, if you notice number 8 on your list there, it says all other details in this parable, night, sleeping, the conversation, etc., that are mentioned in the parable, they're story elements, like we've had in the past. They're story elements and should not be assigned meaning. It's just things that Jesus used to put in there to get us from one action to the other. Okay? Now, Jesus jumps to the second comment, the harvest, and his explanation. He says in verse 40, as the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So he jumps to the end of it all. Second comment. His focus is on the ones who do evil first, and the causes of evil. So those who do evil and the causes of evil are going to be taken out. Those are the weeds. All right? The righteous, evil ones and the causers of evil will be pulled up and thrown into the fiery furnace. This looks forward to a time when God will make everything right. Why do we look forward towards heaven? Y'all want to go to heaven one day? Okay, why?
You can be with him.
So.
So that's good.
I mean, honestly, are you excited about being in heaven one day? Why? Guess what?
I can see that my ancestors that came before me.
Right, okay. So someone said we get to be with him. That is the big reason. To one day be able to embrace God as a friend, not to live a life in which one day when we have to stand before the Almighty, we kind of have to go up there nervously. Allow me to introduce myself. Like we've never met him before. All right? That's one. Now, we get to be with him. Okay. What do we get to be away from?
Sin.
Boom. What else?
Sorry.
Sorrow. What else?
Despair.
Evil. Despair. What else? Death. What else? What else? Temptation.
Assassins.
Everything that causes evil. Everything that causes evil. Evil and everything that causes evil have no place in heaven, praise God. You ever have it? Am I the only one who gets this feeling? You get tired. You know? You wage a spiritual war, and you see darkness in the land. And it's not even that you're mad. You're not angry. It's not even necessarily frustration. It's just your soul is tired because of all the junk that is in the world. We get to look forward to a place. That's right. We get to look forward to a place. None of that stuff exists. Because we're with him. And he cannot be where sin is. You know, sometimes, you know, and then also something I just don't get, something that I just don't understand. There's people who honestly believe that Jesus never talks about hell or separation from God. I'm just like, oh goodness, have you ever read? Yeah. Apparently not close enough. Anytime, you know, this is parable speak now, but when Jesus in the parable says, and they go away to where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, or they're thrown into a fiery furnace, what do we think he's talking about? We know what he's talking about, if we're honest. You know, watch out for people like that. They're in the world today. In fact, I believe that made Time Magazine's cover once. You know, God is dead, or hell doesn't exist, or I'm undead. You know, but I mean, that's, people, again, they try to twist it. They try to prove text. They say, well, a loving God would never do such a thing. A loving God lets us go our own way, too. Yeah, responsibility is fun, isn't it? But we get to look forward to a place where there's no evil or things that cause evil. That's something to look forward to. That's something with which every day we can wake up with a smile on our face and to know I'm a day closer to being there. And I want to be there. Because this place, it loses its charm very quickly. I want to be there. I want to have something to hope for. The righteous will be with the Father in his kingdom, in his barn, in a place where no evil or doers of evil belong. So that's the punchline, you know, in a small shell. It's like that's what Jesus was talking about. But then here's the rub. We're not there yet. So in the confines of the parable, we're actually still in the growing season before the harvest takes place. This is where we sit. Now, the placement of the parable is so important in chapter 13. The parable follows the parable of the sower, which is about the different factors which can destroy the good seed. You know, you have good seed, then you have the path, the rocks, the weeds, and the good soil. But the common element is the good seed. The seed's good, but it's based on where it lands on. And each place that it landed on was about the heart of the person who receives the good news of the gospel. Sometimes the heart's so hard it can't even penetrate. Sometimes the seed lands and it sprouts up quickly because it has a shallow soil, but then, you know, the stresses of the world, it can't take it, and so it dies. Sometimes fear of the world comes in and chokes it out like an everything, and then it dies. But then it can land on good and multiply. But it was the same seed. It just landed in different places. It also, what took place was a discussion on how people miss the kingdom of heaven. Because again, God gets the accusations. Well, if God wanted everybody to be saved, he would tell everybody about him. God does. Or we're supposed to, but not everybody accepts it. You jump back, and you go back to a prophecy of Isaiah, which Jesus quotes in talking about this. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's hearts has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. You know, this morning we did the Pharisee and tax collector, or 2 weeks behind Wednesday morning. And you remember what that was about? It was about humbleness, humility. We have to be humble in order to pursue God. Because we won't pursue God unless we realize I need God. And that's the point Isaiah was making. You can hear all the sermons, you can hear all the teachings, you can read all the law that you want to. But unless we perceive the need to know God, we are going to close our ears to him. It doesn't matter how much church we go to. None of that matters. Do we understand that we need God? But this parable is immediately followed by the mustard seed. Something seemingly small, the mustard seed, or the kingdom of heaven, becoming enormous. We also had the parable of the yeast. A small amount of yeast, the kingdom of heaven, can influence something bigger. The person as an individual or the world. You allow it to work. Also, after this, later, after the definition of what this parable is about, you have the hidden treasure in the pearl. Regardless if you know a lot, the pearl merchant, you might remember when we did that class, or a little, the person who just stumbles upon a hidden treasure. The kingdom of heaven is worth the sacrifice in order to attain it. So Jesus jumps to the end. However, we must still recognize we're in the growing phase. We are still with the weeds. This is where we are. We're still in the ground, growing amongst weeds. So what hope is there for us? What can we get out of this if we're growing next to some weeds? This parable is about the reality of this world. That's what this is. We want to have the good heart. We want to have the open heart to be able to accept the teachings. We want to have the ability to just get a little. And if we're able to just get a little and put it inside of ourselves, it can grow and do enormous things. We want to see the value of it and sacrifice everything we can just so we can have that. We want it so much. We're ready to sacrifice anything that we can get in order to get the kingdom of heaven. We want it. But this is about the reality of the world. This world has weeds growing all the way through it. Sometimes a weed will look like wheat. So we got to be careful. The people of God will strive to fight evil wherever we are, but the truth is, this is a fallen world, and we must strive to persevere, surrounded by a bunch of weeds that want to choke us out. That's what this parable is about. We're all going to grow together, the wheat and the weeds. And no matter how many weeds we're able to pull out of our lives, there's always going to be the threat of other weeds seeking to point up. It's like, our temptations, the temptations that we face daily, they might change as we get older. But there will still be temptations. You go to our oldest members of this church family, which none of them are here tonight, and ask them if they're tempted by the same stuff today as they were when they were maybe 20 or younger. I bet they say no. But then ask them if they're still tempted. Guarantee you they say yes. But as we grow, we have to remember and keep hope in the fact the harvest is coming. It is coming. We don't know when. That we can look forward to Matthew 25. I'll get parables of the 10 virgins, the talents. We're not going to do those in this class because I preach on both. And that's the theme of those. We don't know when he's coming, but he's coming. Keep growing. And don't lose heart. Keep going. We talked about Sunday. Don't sacrifice the eternal for the temporary. This is so temporary. The eternal is coming. Keep going. That's all I got. Anybody have any questions or comments? Get scared and all that. Wait a minute. Oh, I heard it.
You hear the pin drop?
a lot more in there than I thought there was.
Always sitting there waiting for us. He wants us to come and
Yeah. All righty, well, this morning we will go over our prayer list and see how that's going and make adjustments as where we can. Rosendo, Michelle Cloud's dad, I'd ask him for prayers for him as he has Parkinson's and brain surgery, that he might walk again. So we need to pray for him. Miguel Barajas Jr., prayers for safe travel to Houston and for his doctor's appointment that's taking place in a couple of weeks. Friend of Joyce Beasley, unspoken prayer request from a friend in Gatesville, Texas. Violet Daniels, continued prayers for her. Copeland's asked us to remember Brad, prayers for his safety when in Shanghai and safe travels home. He's working. He's training them somehow. It's kind of a work training exercise thing. Yeah, he's teaching something. Family members of Ramigo Villarreal, prayers for gratitude from our church family. I feel blessed. Continuing prayers for family members that are ill and battling illness. Mary and Johnny asked us to pray for North Mission family as they left us Tuesday, so they're up in San Antonio now. Pray for all that are ill. Pray for the Garcia family. And for the family of Ray and Melina, who died in a motorcycle accident. Teacher at Sherryline High School. Cindy Shardle, her surgery was postponed until tomorrow. She fell and broke her right shoulder on Wednesday. Brandon Dora asked us to pray for their children. And Mr. Salinas, prayers for him. He had heart surgery a couple of months ago and is now back in the hospital. His lungs are bad and the doctor said it's not good. Are you trying to figure out who? I'm hearing some whispers. Y'all don't know who Cindy Charlotte is? I'll say she about Joanne's height. Longer hair, wears glasses. Anyway, she actually teaches nurses.
She
She was your teacher?
favorite. And I didn't even know we were a teacher.
Aren't you ashamed?
Until I started.
You still there? Spoke to him.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, just making sure. Did she say, I would have given you a better grade?
I get pretty good and she's a
Yeah.
very.
She's hoping to have her surgery and get healed up before the next season
I
starts.
hope she teaches my class.
Yeah, well,
But she said she's.
broke her shoulder walking her dog. So,
She's one of the only persons that, maybe the only I've ever seen on Facebook when she was telling us what the problem was. She had illustrated
I know.
a diagram of exactly what was gonna be done.
Linda asked me
Well,
what
no,
she do. I was
understand.
like, she broke her shoulder, but she used to correct terminology. It's like, she was telling me, I'm getting surgery on my da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Awesome. Getting shoulder surgery. Is there anything that we need to add to the list?
Did you say Rico already? I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Saw on Facebook today, Rigo Alanise's mom is in a bad way in Brownsville Hospital. He's actually, his work's worked with him. He's actually on his way home from Nigeria so that he can be with his mom. So they pray for safe travels and his mother. right. Anything else? Speaking on prayer, hold peace. It's great having you with us tonight, Mary. If you will, join me in prayer, and then we will be dismissed. Not saying, oh, shoot, I'm so bad about looking into it. Is there anything going on this weekend? Yeah, Saturday? Okay, Saturday at 9 at Danny's. Okay, Gab, Saturday 9 at Danny's, over on 495, Sheridan. So. All right, so if you will, pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful day that you bless us with, and for all the blessings that you've given us, and we're so thankful for you, and we pray that we may have the strength and endurance to live in this world of weeds, and that we may continue to grow strong and to await for the time of your coming, and to trust you with the timing of it. And we pray that we may always live lives in which we look forward to being with you for eternity one day. We don't see it as a treasure, we see it as a joy. And that one day when we finally do get to see each other face to face, we want to run and embrace you as someone who loves us more deeply than anybody else has ever loved us before. We ask that you be with those who have asked for our prayers, be with Rigo as he travels home to be with his mom. We thank you for your son who died on the cross to save us from our sins. In Jesus' name, amen. Bye-bye. Hi, Harper.
Say thank you.